Good evening and welcome to the Commissioner District Redistricting Commission on Monday, May 8th. We are live for participation from Centennial Hall. We also have many members here as we get rolling. And with that, I will pass it along to item number 2.
Item number 2 is adoption of the El Paso County Board of County Commissioners Legislative and Parliamentary Rules and Procedures. Kenneth Hodges, County Attorney.
I think I managed to turn the microphone off. Good evening, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the Redistricting Commission. Kenny Hodges, County Attorney. The next few items are mine. I will tear through them fairly quickly. As you're all aware, what would normally be the Board of County Commissioners is sitting in a different capacity this evening and for some future meetings. There may be times that I make the mistake of calling you commissioners. That's just a creature of habit issue. So the first item that I have on the for the agenda is item number 2. And what item number 2 does is propose that the Redistricting Commission adopt the Board of County Commissioners parliamentary rules for purposes of running these meetings. I understand that there is some desire to accommodate for future meetings in various districts being chaired by the resident commissioner, and that could be addressed by motion. So can I answer any questions on number 2?
Any questions? Commissioner Williams.
I just have a motion ready. Okay, I move that the Redistricting Commission adopt the El Paso County Board of County Commissioners Parliamentary Rules and Procedures as set forth in Board Resolution 23-31 to the extent they're applicable and to apply to the Redistricting Commission meetings. I would propose one deviation, however, and that is for the district-specific meetings, the resident commissioner may be permitted to chair that district's meeting.
I'll second.
There is a motion and a second. Any further discussion or questions from the commissioners? And please clarify for me, Mr. County Attorney, in this different body, do we do public comment after each of these items as well?
Yes, ma'am. I think
them?
that'd be appropriate.
Okay. So is there anyone in the public wishing to speak on item number 2, which is specific to the parliamentary rules and procedures that this body will use throughout the redistricting process? Okay, and none online. Hearing none, there's a motion and a second. I will call the roll. Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Aye.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Aye.
Commissioner Geithner.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. That passes 5-0. Item number 3.
Item number 3 is the Redistricting Commission Sunshine Law Notice. Kenneth Hodges, County Attorney.
Thank you. And commissioners, similar to the previous item, the documents in agenda backup would heavily mirror the Board of County Commissioners sunshine notice provisions. And this again would have to be adopted separately because you're sitting in a different capacity than you typically are as the Board of County Commissioners. So are there any questions that I can answer on the Sunshine Act compliance?
Any questions?
I do have a question.
Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Yes, thank you. So I'm looking at the Sunshine Act compliance proposed wording. It does say notices posted 24 hours. Just want to make sure I understand that 24 calendar hours or 24 business hours?
24 calendar hours are required under the open meetings law.
Okay, that's what the law states? Okay, thank you.
And to clarify, that is an absolute minimum, and I do believe that we are already in process on making sure that those are advanced well or noticed well in advance of the 24 hours. Okay, any other questions? Okay.
Madam Chair, I move approval of the Redistricting Commission 2023 Sunshine Law Notice as it has been attached in the backup and shown on the screen here.
Second?
Okay, that has been moved and seconded. Do we have any members of the public that are wishing to speak on item number 3? If you would, please state your name clearly for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Yeah, I don't think I've got 3 minutes of comments, but for this sunshine law, I would say that my name is Catherine Chukas. I live in District 3. I understand that the 24-hour business hours is a minimum, but as busy people as we are, I would recommend that it's 8 business days before any meeting is set up. We're in the month of Maycember right now for anybody who has school-aged children, especially with sports as well going on and sports finals. Like, it would be best to schedule 8 days in advance for any meetings, please. Also, I would say that on the website called Agenda Suite, which is where you keep agenda documents, can you please create a 2023 redistricting as a department in Agenda Suite so it is easy for people to find redistricting documents. So just by using Agenda Suite, your current software, but putting as a department called 2023 Redistricting, we would be able to filter to the actual documents associated with this. I have no idea if that's sunshine laws or not, but that's visibility of your materials for these meetings because you're saying that you're going to be keeping everything in Agenda Suite. So I'd appreciate it if you would do that as well and direct the staff to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do believe we'll get somewhat of an update on that under item number 7. So you bring up some very good points, and transparency is key, and scheduling out for all of us to be able to do that is pretty key. Okay, anyone else wishing to speak on this item? Please state your name for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Hello, my name is John Jarrell. I would ask that you don't just vote in this bare minimum. I know that so far we are going by the process, doing the bare minimum that is required every step of the way. So it would put more confidence in us if the bare minimum was at 24 hours before you were calling a meeting, because then when you do that later, we have no recourse. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any others wishing to comment on this item? Okay, hearing none, there is a motion and second. Any further discussion from the Redistricting Commission? Okay. With that, I will call the roll. Commissioner Williams.
Aye.
Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Aye.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Aye.
Commissioner Geithner.
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. That passes 5-0. Item number 3.
Item number 4 is the redistricting criteria presentation. Kenneth Hodges, County Attorney.
Thank you. And redistricting commissioners, I have a very brief presentation for you today to go over the general legal parameters for redistricting. Much of this will be repeated from a previous Board of County Commissioners meeting, which we discussed some similar items. All right, to kick things off, the basic constitutional standards set by a case out of the U.S. Supreme Court in 1964. Fundamental right to vote in local elections is protected under the Equal Protection Clause, and that's the one person, one vote rule. Local election systems should be designed to give approximately equal weight to each vote cast, and election systems must not debase or dilute the weight of a citizen's vote, which brings us here to the redistricting process. As far as the federal statutory standard, the Voting Rights Act 1965 does cover some ground for redistricting on a local government level. You'll see in the first bullet, no voting prerequisite or qualification may result in denial or abridgment of the right to vote on account of race, color, or language minority group, with the provision that there's no absolute right to have members of a protected class elected in equal proportion to the population, only that one person, one vote rule is in place. Otherwise, the majority of the Voting Rights Act, it does cover individual conduct and individual behavior that doesn't necessarily pertain to drawing district lines. So you'll see a couple of examples there in the second bullet. Colorado standards, this is the majority of what will drive our conversations both this evening and going forward. First, district lines must be redrawn by September 30th of the second odd number year, that is this year 2023, following the census. Otherwise, changes must be made only in odd numbered years, not subject to alteration more than once every 2 years. El Paso County's commissioners are not elected at large and therefore required to form a redistricting commission. And under Resolution 23-124, approved the Board of Commissioners sitting as that redistricting commission, which you're doing this evening. Staff that's appointed to assist with redistricting are prohibited from communicating with the commission or the public about content or development of any plan outside of public hearings. Once again, this is a very different scenario than a typical board meeting. You'll see that the county administrator is not here on my advice for that reason. The commission is to hold at least 3 public hearings in different thirds of the county. Hearings must be broadcast and allow both in-person and virtual testimony. I believe the staff will get into the overall plan for in excess of that number of meetings here a little bit later this evening. The commission is to maintain a redistricting website through which any county resident may submit proposed plans and/or written comments, which must be published on the redistricting website along with recordings of hearings. And third and final slide on the Colorado standards for redistricting. Good faith effort must be made to draw as nearly equal in population as possible. No more than 5% deviation between the most populous and least populous district is allowed. As reasonably as possible, the Redistricting Commission is to preserve whole communities of interest. It's defined as those sharing a substantial interest, including shared urban, rural, agricultural, industrial, trade, education, employment, environment, public health, transportation, water, racial, ethnic, and language minority group concerns, and composed of reasonably proximate population. Then minimize the number of divisions of a city or town. And after considering those first 3 bullets, thereafter maximize the number of politically competitive districts to the extent reasonably possible. Competitiveness means reasonable potential for party affiliation to change at least once between censuses measured by past election results, party registration data, and evidence-based analysis. So with that, redistricting commissioners, that is my presentation on the general legal parameters. Are there any questions that I can answer?
Any questions?
Okay, thank you.
And to clarify this, Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my question, maybe is going to be the other staff. Is there definitions of community of interest? And so that's something I'll want answered throughout the process that we do this on. Thank you. It doesn't need to be answered right now, but that's what I hope will help guide us as well. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. And just really briefly, the third bullet on this slide, this final slide, sorry, the second bullet, actually goes through the statutory definition of what a community of interest is. So it's that big old long list that I rattled off. And I think the staff will be able to get into it.
Yeah, I just kind of want some kind of stated examples for the public of what that means.
Sure.
Okay. And this is not an action item, so no vote is required for this.
Correct.
Correct. That brings us to item number 5.
Item number 5 is the baseline district data presentation. Steve Schleicher, El Paso County Clerk and Recorder.
Good evening, Commissioner. Steve Schleicher, El Paso County Clerk and Recorder. Blake, can you pull up my slide presentation, please? There you go. Thanks, Blake. So commissioners, I'm going to go through some items that we've already heard previous, but I want to go ahead and bring these back up because we have a lot of new folks that are joining us this evening. So today what I want to sit there and talk about is the redistricting baseline, get into each one of our individual commissioner districts from District 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So the baseline is during the 2017 re-precincting, there was an opportunity to examine commissioner districts for possible adjustments. So when you sit there and you take a look at the statutory overview, is each district shall be as nearly equal in population as possible based on the most recent federal census of the United States, and it shall not be subject to alteration more often than once every 2 years, which our county attorney just mentioned. Other statutory considerations include compactness. This refers to the principle that the constituents residing within an electoral district should live as near to one another as possible. Compactness can be measured as a ratio of the circumference of a district and its total area. Districts with higher ratios are said to be less compact and relatively equal in population. Commissioner districts were last examined in 2015 when population between districts were deviated by 4.1%. The optimal district size determined at that time was 136,138 individuals residing within each district. With growth in 2017, commissioner districts deviated 3.06%. So data for the commissioner districts was based off the 2010 census data for a precinct's population, not registered voters. So here's what we're looking at in each one of the districts. Where District 1, the population was 777 individuals, a deviation of 1,639. And as you could definitely tell, is outlined for the whole entire El Paso County and all 5 districts, is deviation under current outline was 3.06%. So the optimal district size at that time in 2017 was 136,138 residents within each district. Just a little map of where you see where District 1, we had to make some adjustments there, District 2, to bring the other 3 back on up. So from past efforts, the Clerk and Recorder's Office learned that interested parties define community of interest. So Commissioner Gonzalez, just to answer your question here. So these are interested parties that define community of interest as existing political boundaries such as municipal, legislative, and school district boundaries. Shared natural events such as fire, floods, landslides. We've all seen this on the west side of I-25. Our military installations, rural and urban areas, and improvement in other special districts that we have here in El Paso County. So what are our goals that we went ahead and complied with in 2017? Was to comply with Colorado Constitution and our revised statutes at that time. Draw each commissioner into a district, not draw out declared candidates. Reasonably maintain equal population while anticipating future growth, which we have seen quite a bit. Preserve key features for each district. Preserve reasonable definition of community of interest. Create districts that were geographically identifiable. Appropriately align representation for areas affected by our natural disasters, Waldo Canyon fire, Black Forest fire, our Manitou floods, our West Side landslides. And also maintain the Board of County Commissioners' desire to increase representation for our Eastern Plains here in El Paso County. So 2023, the current commissioner districts is as such, and I know this is pretty difficult. Blake, are you able to zoom in on this a little bit? No, that's not good at all. It's pretty blurry. Okay, so what we're looking at, commissioners, is we have quite a bit of growth that has happened over the last few years. And our optimal is we're looking at 146,561 residents within each district. So as you can sit there and see, there are a number of districts that would need to be adjusted. So the deviation in district number 1 is 1,779, so 1.2%. So what we're looking at in that deviation is we're going to have to sit there and remove that number of folks from, move them out of that district into another district. District 2 is we're looking at 7,195 individuals. in District 2. In District 3, we're looking at having to add a number of individuals into that district. And that's about 7,600 individuals. In District 4, there's about 4,500 individuals that need to be moved out of that district to get to the optimal. And then in District 5, as you can see, is about 5,700 individuals need to be added into District 5 to be optimal. So here are the demographics, and this is information that has been pulled from the state demographer's office, so anybody can go to the website and check this data. Something that everybody here in El Paso County knows is we've been saying for a number of years, this is a great place to live, El Paso County's great, and the word's gotten out and everybody's been moving here. But the population growth, as you see, we've been keeping steady with Denver over the last 10 years. But in my former role as your county assessor, I've shared with you, we are now the most populous county in all of Colorado, and by quite a bit. And you can definitely see that by what is represented here by the largest population in 2020, and we've retained that number of being number one over the last 3 years. The percentage of growth, as you see here, some of our counties just north of us are seeing 30% increases over the 10-year period. So the demographics, I broke this down. I won't go each row by row, but you look at the population estimates by age, single year of age, the total here in El Paso County. Race ethnicity, again, pulled this from the state demographer's office, is currently, or back in 2021, Hispanics are about 18.29% of our total population. White alone is 67.83% of our total population. Black or African American makes up 5.97% of our population. Asian alone, 2.95%. Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander is 0.3%. American Indian and Alaskan Native is 0.62%. Or two or more is 4.05%, according to the census data. Commissioner district population 3-year percent comparison from 2017 to 2020. District 1 saw a plus 7.7% growth difference over that time frame, which comes out to be 2.5% per year. District 2 saw an 11% gain in population, which comes out to be 3.6% per year. District 3, 2.7%, which came out to 0.9% per year. District 4 saw an increase of 12.5% in population, which is 4.1% per year. And then District 5 saw an increase of 4.3%, which equates out to 1.43% per year. So here's the deviation. This looks a lot better than what was on the map. So the 2020 population in District 1, 148,340. The deviation is 1,779, which is 1.214%. So as I mentioned, is we're going to have to sit there and take a look at as far as those individuals going into another commissioner district. District 2, 153,756 individuals within Commissioner District 2. That deviation is 7,195 for 4.9%. District 3, 138,752. That is a deviation of minus 7,809, which is a deviation percent of minus 5.328%. District 4, 151,129. The deviation is 4,568 individuals for a deviation percent of 3.117%. And then lastly, District 5, 2020 population is 140,828, a minus 5.733 in deviation, which is a deviation percentage of minus 3.912%. So as you can sit there and see, Commissioner District 1, and what we did is we broke down these precincts of where a majority of our citizens are living. So the darker the blue, the majority of where those individuals are living within that district. So looking at the population, the deviation percentage, the optimal again is 146,561. So we're looking at 1,779 individuals within District 1 going into another commissioner district. District 2, Again, we're looking at 7,195 citizens moving into a different commissioner district. District 3, we're having to add to Commissioner District 3 in a number of 7,809. We're going to have to subtract 4,568 citizens to get to optimal from Commissioner District 4. And we're going to have to add 5,733 citizens to Commissioner District 5. So, the guide to redistricting, the purpose. Redistricting applies to all levels of government where district elections are held. Preparation, there's a limited amount of time to make changes to election systems. So once we sit there and we decide, once the commission decides what map to go with and things like that, is your clerk and recorder's office is going to have to make changes in the SCORE election system because people are going to be voting in different commissioner districts, just a lot of different things where people might definitely get different ballots. So we're going to have to update the whole entire election system. So again, just updating the election system SCORE after census data is released and before subsequent elections occur. Preparation for redistricting can begin, as we know, months before updated district boundaries are finalized. There's several methods we could go about this. Meet and bounds. Boundaries of a parcel of real estate that is identified by its natural landmarks, something I was very familiar with as your former county assessor. Meets and bounds landmarks are often used in a legal description of land. Precinct boundaries is what I'd like to recommend. Voting precincts are the geographic area used to report election results and serve as one of the many building blocks the county uses to determine what's on your ballot and prepare for elections. It is recommended to move full pre-existing precincts only for redistricting. So clerk and recorder complementary resources is doing the redistricting.
Sorry, we have one question. Sorry to interrupt. Commissioner Williams.
Thank you. So what is, when you say move full pre-existing precincts, after that, if you had to do precinct splits, would you then do them? Because I know, is there an optimal number you like in a precinct of citizens?
So moving a whole entire existing precinct would be optimal, but I do understand there might be where we would have to split a precinct commissioner. So I do understand that, but for most part is if we look at just moving a whole entire precinct into a different commissioner district, that would be optimal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So clerk and recorder complementary resources. I feel as the clerk and recorder, we should not charge for any maps during this redistricting process. So we are going to give out free basic maps. So we're going to go ahead and give out El Paso County maps. So if citizens want these, I do recognize that folks want to be able to touch it. They want to be able to put a map on their table. They want to be able to sit there and look at the current boundaries. We're also going to sit there and provide current El Paso County commissioner districts. I put the hyperlinks because all these maps are out on the website right now. We'll provide precinct maps and can provide one countywide single map, including all El Paso County precincts for free. I will also include school district maps so everybody knows where our 17 different school districts. Many folks don't know we're probably the most unique county in all of Colorado, where we have 17 school districts where many only have one. And can provide one countywide single map, including all El Paso County school districts for free. So during this process, I, as clerk and recorder, will not be charging for any maps where folks can go ahead and get that for free from the office. So with that being said, are there any questions?
I have one more.
Commissioner Williams.
So if you go back a couple slides to where you had the map with the dark blue precincts, all 5 commissioner districts that showed which ones may need to be moved or which ones represent, nope, now go forward, right there. So you showed the different colors. Is that something that's available to people if they want that?
Absolutely. And Commissioner, we actually brought copies this evening.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, Commissioner Gonzalez?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I think you mentioned a compactness. It sounded like it was a mathematical equation. I'd actually like to have that for the 5 commissioner districts, particularly since I think I'm not very compact. Thanks. But it sounds like there's a mathematical principle, and that's, so I'd like to see what the numbers are for the 5 districts. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Does that conclude your presentation?
That's it. Thank you, Commissioner.
Excellent. Again, this is not an action item. It was informational only. So we are on item number 7. 6.
Item number 6 is political competitiveness measurement options. Ryan Parcell, Executive Director, Government Affairs.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thank you for being here, and thank you for everybody in attendance today. Wait for this to load up here. All right. So we've talked about some of the other measurements for how districts can be configured and what the statute says. And I'm going to do a little bit more of a deep dive into the competitiveness factor. Just by way of an agenda for this presentation, I'll go over the background, the measurements that are in the law, and then what staff has contemplated, along with our recommendation, and leave some time for questions. So by way of background, as Mr. Hodges talked about, there are the criteria for commissioner redistricting: the mathematical population, adherence to the Voting Rights Act, preserving communities of interest, and then the final consideration is therefore thereafter, to the extent reasonably possible, maximize the number of competitive districts. And we'll be looking at that from a couple different aspects today as part of the baseline measurement that Clerk and Recorder Schleicher talked about. So in the law, it talks about competitiveness in a couple different areas. So part of the responsibility of the commission is to solicit evidence relevant to competitiveness of elections in the county and assess such evidence in evaluating proposed plans. Competitive means that it has a reasonable opportunity to change partisan affiliation hands once every 10 years, which Mr. Hodges had talked about, and that we can do that by looking at past election results, proposed districts, political party affiliation, and other evidence-based analysis for proposed districts. And so we'll touch on each of those here in a little bit. And then this is a big, long portion here. I'm not going to read the whole thing, and this presentation will be available online. But the commission may provide direction for the development of these plans through adoption of standards, guidelines, and methodologies to be used to evaluate a plan's competitiveness, which again, we'll discuss here in a little bit. So in summary, it's within the purview of the County Commissioner Redistricting Commission to determine the methodology by which staff evaluates future plans for competitiveness. So let's go over the measurements real quick. So one of the competitive measurements has to do with party affiliations for any particular district. And the idea is that those affiliated with a particular political party generally vote for the members of that political party, and unaffiliated voters are generally undecided voters. But recent studies would indicate that generally isn't true, that a growing number of unaffiliated voters have what could be construed as partisan underlying political leanings, and that those aren't necessarily accounted for by just looking at party affiliation. So while it's one of the measurements that the law says that we can look at, it may not be the most effective measurement to look at. And and I have a little pause here for a case study, that there is a state out there that has almost an equal number, a third of Republicans, a third of Democrats, and a third of unaffiliated voters. And does anyone want to take a guess of which state it is? All right. No. All right. It's West Virginia, which is generally not considered a politically competitive state. It has a Republican governor, one Republican senator, one Democratic senator. All the House members are Republican, huge majorities for Republicans in both chambers of the legislature. So generally not considered a competitive state. Another is a method that's been used by the State Redistricting Commission, which is to pick out a couple of key Colorado races and measure the deviation in a proposed district or an existing district against those results. But that doesn't necessarily account for that methodology and applied in these areas doesn't account for Colorado's rapidly changing political nature. And so that's not the most effective measurement of competitiveness either, because Colorado already behaves a certain way, and you're just measuring people against themselves as opposed to some broader or accounting for different variables, sorry. And so in this case, there's a case study in a House district that based off of the Redistricting Commission's proposal was 3% more Republican than everything else, and that was considered to be competitive. But in this last election, there wasn't a single Republican running state or county-wide that carried that area. And so I want to caution about that, and that's House District 16. And I apologize, I got this slide out of order. This is supposed to be right after the portion that talks about party affiliation, so I apologize for that. But this slide here shows the current party affiliation by each commissioner district. And so that speaks for itself. I won't go over every figure there, but you can see that that the party affiliation doesn't necessarily coincide with the party affiliation. So the last competitiveness measure that I want to talk about is an evidence-based measurement practice that is used throughout the country. And that's something called the Cook Partisan Voting Index. You'll see this mentioned in media reports. You'll see it featured for every congressional district in the Almanac of American Politics, which is a publication that's come out every couple of years since the 70s. You can tell the real geeks in the room because they're shaking their head that they bought every single one and read them religiously. The difference in this measurement is instead of judging people against themselves, you remove the variables by measuring the results in a particular district against the last two presidential elections. So then you can see how different people behaved in similar conditions throughout the country. And it works by taking the last two results for the presidential election, averaging them out, and then comparing them to the nationwide average. And from that, you will get a number either in favor of Republicans or Democrats or even, and that will be connotated by an R+1 or a D+3 or something like that. And that's something that you can apply to each of the districts. And so our case study in this one is Colorado Congressional District 8, which was rated by the Cook Partisan Voting Index as even based on the last two presidential election results. President Trump carried this area in 2016 and President Biden carried it in 2020, and it was one of the most competitive districts in the country, settled by less than 1,500 votes between the two major parties. So by using that baseline analysis, you can look at the results from that and say that that measurement is relatively sound. So to go a little bit into that, the Cook Partisan Political Report also measures complete states. So Arizona is rated as an R+2, Colorado D+4, Georgia R+3, Maine D+2, and Pennsylvania R+2. A couple interesting things that I want to talk about with the information on this screen, because it's how do you use this to measure competitiveness. So even in a state like Arizona that's R+2, it has flipped in the last presidential election between the parties traditionally supported to now. And in fact, all the states featured on this page, while they would fit into the confines of politically competitive, all voted for President Biden in the last presidential election. And so that competitiveness factor can be D plus a couple numbers on one side or R plus a couple numbers on the other, and it would still be considered competitive. So here's, based off of the current commissioner districts, in one column, you see the presidential election results. The first number, so in District 1, 61 is 36, is the Trump versus Biden number. And we do that same order in 2016. 64-26 is Trump versus Clinton. So going down the line, you can see Commissioner Districts 1 and 2 have a pretty heavy Republican advantage at this point, R plus 15 and R plus 14 respectively. Commissioner District 3 is even, where it flipped under the same lines between 2016 and 2020, backing President Trump in 2016 and President Biden in 2020. So that would be considered under the Cook Partisan Voting Index an even district. District 4, R plus 8, and then District 5 is R plus 3. So District 5 is still relatively in that competitive range. A couple other things, while this speaks to the presidential election results, it's worth noting that in 2022, Senator Bennett also carried districts 3 and 5, and Governor Polis in 2022 carried districts 3, 4, and 5. So much like what Clerk and Recorder Schleicher was talking about, the key to being able to calculate partisan voting index is to move whole precincts between districts. And the reason for that is you can go back and look at a precinct with a little bit of work if that precinct has changed numbers or something like that, and you can get precinct level election result data for previous years and use that to calculate Cook Partisan Voting Index. And so likewise, I would recommend that as we are moving or redistricting or creating new districts or anything like that, that we work within the existing precinct lines. It doesn't mean district lines, but that means existing lines. And that also gives people a little bit of flexibility when they want to create their own districts. If somebody wanted to go off of House districts or Senate districts or school districts, there's not a circumstance where a precinct is split between 2 different House districts, and there's not a circumstance where a precinct is split between 2 different Senate districts. So it makes it clean. I'm not sure if the same is true on school districts, but there has been care in the past given to drawing precincts based off of school district lines as well. And so we recommend that we look at all of the evidence-based factors when comparing competitiveness, that we still look at party affiliation, but that we interject the Cook Partisan Index as a measurement for this as well. So with that being said, are there any questions?
I guess I get to be first with the most questions. Can you go back maybe 2 slides where it showed, yeah, right there, the PVI. Now this question may be more for County Attorney Hodges. So does each district within 10 years have to have the opportunity to be represented at the same measure of political competitiveness, i.e. Republican versus Democrat? So does this all have to be as close to 0 as possible, or is the purpose to make as many close as possible, even if we have 1 or 2 districts that are still way Republican?
Commissioner, would you, I'm sorry to do this to you, but would you mind repeating that question? I think I follow, but I don't want to answer a different question.
Okay, so when you go back to the criteria of the competitiveness, meaning that there is a reasonable potential for party affiliation to change once between federal decennial censuses. Does that mean we have to make all 5 have that reasonable ability, or can we say 2 or 3? Because I'm usually heavily Republican in my area. So it would present a challenge, I would think.
Thanks, Commissioner. That clarification helps. After considering the equal population criteria, preservation of communities of interest, and minimizing the number of divisions of cities or towns, then after considering those things, attempt to maximize the competitiveness of each district.
Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So with regard to the, sir,
You will have an opportunity during public comment. Commissioner Vanderwerf.
thank you. So with regard to this this Cook Index, which you're talking about here, could you refresh my memory again on its volume of use across the country or within Colorado or whatever? Like, you know, again, trying to get an understand, like, if we're going to adopt that kind of an approach, how broadly is it used?
Thank you, Commissioner. I would say very broadly used to the point where news anchors will speak to it in election night reporting. It's been the standard used in the Almanac of American Politics at least since 2000, maybe even going further back than that, but I'd have to look at some old copies. And generally accepted by many in the political science community, as well as other academic avenues. So, you know, like any measurement, you could say pluses or minuses about it either way, but you'll find far more pluses than I think you'll find minuses.
Thank you. I mean, you know, you provided a couple of options, and there's no easy way to figure out how to try to do this. But if this is kind of a generally accepted practice that's across the country and used in a lot of places, to your point, nothing is perfect. But I like the fact that it is in broad use. That I think is useful.
Thank you. And for what it's worth, I think it also adds a measure of transparency by people knowing how the calculations are done. This isn't something that's been developed in-house. Somebody could go to the website, look at the methodology, hold staff accountable for whether or not we're applying it correctly, and see the results in public settings.
Thank you.
Commissioner Geithner.
Thank you. So I appreciate having a somewhat objective measure here, and I'm going to point out something that's probably rather obvious, but in connection to these other questions around districts and competitiveness and how many, and obviously it's the last measure of criteria there that was on your slide. So we would not, it seems, forego one of the previous three in order to get to the last one. And I think if I'm reading how this calculation is done, in terms of figuring out that competitiveness, it would, I mean, mathematically, we cannot make every district at the same level of competitiveness based on this criteria. Is that what you're saying in terms of what these specific numbers are?
Yeah, as to whether or not we could achieve a certain PVI across every district, if you were to take the 3 or the 5 and average them out, I suspect you could probably find a way to draw lines that that would do that. But I don't know how that would necessarily be done without doing a deep dive into it, while still preserving communities of interest or something like that. It would mean taking some generally Republican areas and generally some Democratic areas and trying to even them out. But people don't. There's been political science, and I even think GIS studies that talk about self-sorting and everything else, and people generally live in communities more and more where people tend to think alike, and so getting to a point where you're doing those sorts of surgical lines while not breaking up minority groups or some other community of interest. Could be problematic, but you never say never. I think that would depend on the direction that the board decides to give to staff and what staff can come up with in line with that direction.
Sure. If I could follow up. Which is not the case, obviously, by our numbers here, but I'm exaggerating here. But if our county was 75% Democrat, say, it would not be mathematically possible, even if we ignored all the criteria, to create competitive districts for every one of them based on this.
Yes, thank you. I think if you look back at previous redistricting reports, the 2010 redistricting report, in which Bob Levy from, I think, Colorado College was on that, they tried to do that in Denver, and they just couldn't figure out from a state house perspective how to do that. And so they wanted to try to balance it out, but they weren't able to achieve that.
Just trying to gauge for the future of going for what is realistic here, and I'm guessing that's probably why it is the last level of criteria, is because the other ones are more objectively achievable regardless of the math, whereas this one is kind of subject to the math. Fair?
Yeah.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. For transparency purposes, I would like to see another comparison. I do understand, based on the competitive measure number 1, did not seem very, very useful for us, but under competitive measure number 2, if we can go to that slide, I think it's probably 2 slides before this. Yeah.
This one here.
The statewide, Governor Polis did quite well in El Paso County. I think he got 48% vote in the last governor's election. So if there's a way to show similar to the PVI of the, R plus to where Polis plus or minus, I'd kind of like to see comparison utilizing that. I still think number 3 is probably where I'd be leaning to, but I feel uncomfortable having only seen one example very specifically with data, and maybe it was a different race that was more close in El Paso County in a statewide race, but I'd like to see something. If it's the Polis race, then that's great. If it's a different one, that's fine, but I'd like to see one more thing before I say, yeah, I want to do number 3. I'd like to see some numbers on another example, and then maybe just compare the two. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have that data for the 2022 election, and we could quickly pull that together.
Commissioner Geithner.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So that would be my question is, do we have to choose one of these 3, or can we kind of look at each one of these in the process?
Commissioner, I don't think that you need to choose any one. Our recommendation is that we go with the measurements that are in the law, which talks about party affiliation and other evidence-based measurements. I would just recommend that we use the Cook Partisan Voting Index as one of those measurements. But whatever direction you guys give us, whether that's taking a look at other statewide results and everything else, as long as we move whole precincts, we can get past election data.
I just wanted to make sure, because it sounded like maybe Commissioner Gonzalez was concerned about, choosing this one method and only looking, but it looks like we have plenty of options to continue to look at all of these measures. At this point, we're not making a decision tonight. Is that correct?
That's my understanding, unless you feel differently, Commissioner.
And then to Commissioner Gonzalez's question a little bit here too, yes, most of us are somewhat familiar with outcomes of elections in terms of El Paso County, and we talked about the districts. And I know you said, is there a Polis number, but I think that PVI still could be for the county level. Do you have that for the county as a whole?
I might be able to get that for you later tonight. If I go pull some things, I think I could get that for you.
That'd be great. I just think that would maybe come to answer your question a little bit. It doesn't have to be based on Polis. It can use the same index, and you would say, here's the outcome of this particular election, here's the PVI, and you could kind of look at what that means in relationship to the election, was my thought.
Any other questions? Commissioner Van der Werf?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate the questions as well, but there's a lot to consider in trying to figure this out, because there's all, like as was stated before, the communities of interest, which you can take a look at a school district kind of consideration. You can take a look at municipality considerations. You can look at other common interests, like, for example, on the west side, fire risk. There's just in some of the others listed in there, agricultural versus urban. And I think it was something that was evident to me when we went through this in 2017. There is just absolutely no way to get us to something that's perfect with all of those different wide varieties of communities of interest. So I think the best approach is just to try to do the best that we can based on a large number of types of calculations and trying to deal with that. And that's what we did last time too, because it was, you pick one item and try to optimize that, and then you end up sub-optimizing something else. So you end up trying to have to get to some measure of balance. And I think it's fair to say that this Cook Index is going to can be a player to that, but it's only one out of a lot of variables that'll be taken into consideration, because we want to try and balance those out as much as we can.
Any other comments or questions? Okay. With that, we will move on to item number 7.
Item number 7 is upcoming meetings, recommendations, and general updates. Ryan Parcell, Executive Director, Government Affairs.
All right. Hello again. And to the comments that were made earlier about future meeting dates and everything else, I think that this will help answer a lot of those questions in these general updates. And Blake, I'd like to give you a fair warning that I might ask you at some point to pull up the El Paso Co. website. Thank you. Okay, so general updates. Next, County Commissioner Redistricting Commission meeting dates. So not only do we have our 5 district meeting dates scheduled, but we do have locations for 2 of them and working on nailing down the locations for the other ones. So I'll defer to Kenny as to whether or not this counts as the official sunshine notice, but it's our intention to publish these dates and locations on the El Paso County redistricting website, as well as send out press releases with the applicable information for what's already been scheduled and additional information once new locations are nailed down. So the next redistricting meeting would be June 12th, 2023 at 5:30 p.m. Most of these meetings will be held in the evening per the direction that we received to ensure the greatest amount of public engagement and availability. The one after that will be June 21st at 5:30. And sorry, the first one on Monday, June 12th, they'll be at Lewis Palmer High School in Commissioner District 1. And then the other one will be at Mountain View Academy, which is in Commissioner District 2. From there, the other dates, both locations to be determined, are July 6th, July 10th, and July 17th at 5:30, 5:30, and 9 a.m. respectively. And so I can hear the pens clicking in the background. Again, this information will be available. I'm also happy to provide copies of the presentation to anyone that wants it, so they don't have to worry about trying to feverishly take notes and get all this information right now.
Commissioner Van der Werf.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. For these meetings, Redistricting Commission meeting dates that don't have a location identified yet, are we settled on the dates and we will be abiding by the dates, or is there still going to be some flexibility in dates? The reason why I'm asking is for those in the audience or anybody listening online, if they can determine if there's a commitment from the team here on the dates.
Yes, these dates are certain, they're firm, they're on each of your calendars, including Mr. Hodges. It's the locations that are up in the air, not the dates and times.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you for that clarification, Commissioner.
Any other questions on that portion?
Okay. As for the deadline status, we have created a website for redistricting that was completed. We were shooting for a May 12th completion date, but that is completed as of today. That enables somebody to get general information about commissioner redistricting. It will have information about future meeting dates. It will have agenda information on that website as well. So Blake, would you mind going ahead and pulling that up for a moment, please? So from our main webpage, Commissioner Redistricting is prominently featured. Takes you to a unique URL, elpasoco.com/redistricting with another slash. It has an explanation of redistricting. It also has an interactive map. And of course, it's going to take a little bit to load up here. But you can zoom in and somebody can get a very distinct idea of where the current boundaries are. You can submit and view public comment, which this takes you to a form that you can fill out with your information. You can select or you can input your comments, and you can also upload a file of your redistricting map. And then all the comments will eventually make its way onto a submitted comments portion. Some staff will review just to make sure there's nothing lewd or inappropriate that's been uploaded that's just automatically on there. But that means that both the public and you as commissioners can see what anybody else has submitted. From there, it talks about the commission, the plan criteria, plan development criteria, some information about public involvement, and it has the different dates and deadlines here. So to the question that was earlier, instead of having to go to the agenda suite, you can come here, you can link directly to the agenda for just these meetings, and once the meeting is done, we will upload video as well. So this website fulfills all the requirements by the law, but we wanted to go a step further, and staff is in the process of securing and getting the underlying data into a system called Esri, which people will be able to access from this website when it's ready, and they can use that to draw their own maps and submit the maps to us. So have the population data that Clerk and Recorder Schleicher was talking about as well. So if you prefer paper, we have an option for you for that. And if you prefer to do it online, we'll have an option for you for that as well. So trying to go above and beyond for the sake of our citizens and making this easy for them. So that is up and ahead of schedule. So Blake, I'm gonna live dangerously here and try to navigate this myself for a moment. So as of right now, that website is live, which means that citizens can go to it, and they have until July 14th to submit any comment and plans through the website. And then, of course, we're in progress, and so far well ahead of meeting our goal to have all 5 public hearings, meaning 1 in each commissioner district before our August 4th deadline. And then we can still determine if we're going to hold the meetings here for final plan adoption or something else, or if we want to do that elsewhere. But the district meetings are already in progress. So nothing completed yet on any of these because these are deadlines associated with the end of plan. Any questions about this? I want to make sure I'm not going too fast. Yes, sir.
Commissioner Vanderwerf.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So for people to do an evaluation to come up with their own concept to submit and so forth, and imagine maybe this is maybe obvious, but I'm just going to ask the question. If we're going to talk about kind of movement of precincts, and we also now know the data about population differences between the commission, between the different districts for the commissioners, will we also have on this website the population of each precinct?
Yes.
So that it'll be obvious, like to kind of do your own plan and you'll be able to do your own numbers game.
Yeah, and I don't want to speak for the clerk and recorder, but if I understand correctly, and you can come up if you want, but I think that per precinct population data is some of the information that the clerk and recorder's office is going to release free of charge to the public.
Okay, great, thanks.
So then our next steps, covered some of this a little bit, but staff will advertise the county commission redistricting meetings and provide additional information. I've talked about the redistricting tool, and then just a general question that I had for you guys when the agenda item comes up for next steps or direction to staff is if there was a specific set of questions that you wanted to ask the public about commissioner redistricting, whether on the website or in the meetings, so we can prepare agendas as well as prepare the public that if you come to one of the district commission meetings, for instance, you'll be asked these 2 or 3 questions. So that's what I had for you today, commissioners.
Any questions? Comments? Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And item number 8.
Item number 8 is public comment, and this is the public's opportunity to speak on an item.
Can I get a show of hands on how many plan to speak? Okay, excellent. I'd ask that you just, in an orderly way, make your way down here. And if you want to queue up on both sides, that might help keep us efficient. Please state your name for the record, and you will have 3 minutes. Commissioner Williams.
They do have to sign in as well, but my other comment was in appreciation to everyone here. When you do comment from the audience, if the commissioner is virtual, none of those comments are heard. And so that's why we do appreciate that you come up in an orderly fashion, because if one of the commissioners is virtual in this specific auditorium, we can't hear you when you are saying something just from the audience. And that's just very helpful so that it's recorded and we know that someone said something. So thank you.
Thank you. You may proceed.
Chairwoman Bremer, can you hear me okay? All right. And members of the commission, my name is Carlos Pettis. I'm a 29-year resident of Colorado Springs. I come before you having experience in redistricting and having recommendations that might be helpful for this commission. Some background on me. In 2020, I served on the Colorado Springs District Advisory Process Committee to assist the city clerk with the nonpartisan redistricting of our 6 council districts. The following year in 2021, I was selected by a nonpartisan panel of retired judges to serve on the inaugural Colorado Independent Legislative Redistricting Commission, where I also served as the commission chair. In my role, I traveled throughout the state to listen to citizens and incorporate what I learned into redistricting plans. We held 35 public meetings, convened 45 commission meetings, received 600 citizen-drawn maps through our map gallery. I am an unaffiliated voter, but not apathetic when it comes to good government. I strongly believe that all our citizens deserve fair representation, and it is the reason why I appear before you today. My experience has taught me that the citizens need high-quality information and guidance to make informed decisions. Fair maps are grounded in good data and transparency. I come before you to ask that you post quality information and everything data on the Commission Redistricting portal. Specifically, I asked the Commission to publish data in machine-readable formats, which is compatible with GIS software and spreadsheets. This includes precinct-level GIS shapefiles with the demographic information and other data, tables that map the precincts to the underlying census blocks, and, if possible, historical precinct data that maps to new precinct number mapping. Data for measuring competitiveness, such as past election results and voter registrations. It was mentioned that we have the Cook Partisan Voting Index. Please publish that. We'd like to see the methodologies. No proprietary methodologies. Please provide the reports. Future county commissioner district election schedules for which districts are up for re-election in 2024 and 2026. This is needed to understand the implications of moving boundaries which can cause voters to move from one district to another. evidence-based reports and surveys for identifying communities of interest, and data and evidence to ensure compliance with the Voting Rights Acts of 1965. Redistricting is daunting. There's a notable resource that I call to your attention, and that's the UCCS GeoCivics program, which has collected and synthesized many resources that are valuable to local redistricting efforts. I know firsthand that the staff at the UCCS GeoCivics program is essential to our success for state redistricting. They should be highlighted on the redistricting portal. I highly recommend inviting them to assist with both nonpartisan analysis, education, and public outreach. Thank you very much for your time considering these recommendations.
Thank you, sir.
Hi, my name is Amy Pascal. I live in District 3. One thing that I saw when I looked at the schedule of dates, I don't see a date where this body is going to put out their maps and then a period following where the public can comment. I think it's really important that we have that kind of information. I also wanted to just dispute the assertion that House District 16 is not competitive. In the last election, it took several days before we even knew who the winner was. So I'd say that reflects competitiveness. I'd also like to comment that I don't think it's statistically reasonable to look at one race and say, oh, look, this is competitive or not competitive, because that assumes that the candidates in the race are of equal quality. It assumes that Republicans and Democrats never cross party lines, and it assumes unaffiliateds don't change who they vote for. I think all of which is not true. So it needs to be a statistical accumulation of races and not just one race. Thanks.
Thank you.
Hello, this is John Jarrell again. I wanted to speak on the idea of using the Cook Partisan Voting Index. I know that there is a desire, I mean, we can see it between the two meetings here, to use Polis's numbers as a base to say what districts are competitive or not. But the statewide Republicans are not putting up good candidates anymore. Like the Colorado Republican Party is done. Locally, you guys are getting things done. I don't mean Vicky Tompkins and that crowd. You know who I'm talking about, people backing you right here. So I would say that using something like the Cook Partisan Voting Index, which is something that has less partisanship behind it than trying to use numbers that will allow you to draw the districts in a way that favors you better, is definitely the direction we want to go. And I have good news for you on that front. If you follow the rest of the rules, so if you stop dividing Monument, if you stop dividing the Plains out east, because we talked about how, I think it's really funny how out west, where there's the fire problem, well, we needed to unite them under one district so they can get representation. But out east, we needed to split them so they can get more representation. I forget which one of you is from the Plains. Okay, so the good news is, as well, if you stop dividing up Southeast Colorado Springs, if you stop dividing up the minority populations in Southeast Colorado Springs, there you have it. You've already got, by the steps I just said, you've got your competitive districts. And I just want to call to this idea that I've heard repeated here, especially at the last meeting, that you don't want people to miss an election cycle, right? You don't want them to miss it because this would be bad. And it was a big deal back in 2017 why we couldn't unite Patty Jewett, for example, because then people would miss an election cycle. Well, people would prefer to miss an election cycle if it meant the end of being disenfranchised for 50 years, right? I mean, we can agree on that. And it would not be possible. And what you're saying then, by that measure, is you're telling the people in the Southeast, like, I'm sorry, you know, it's just in the past. It wasn't gerrymandering. It just happens. Oops, we divided up minority populations between districts to dilute their vote. And now, because you vote in different years, we can't unite you again. I'm so sorry. All right, thank you.
My name is Catherine Chukas. I'm a District 3 resident. I had a couple comments on some different agenda items. I felt that when Mr. Parcell mentioned minority groups, Mr. Hodges did not in agenda number 4. I feel like on that presentation, which we didn't see until he put it on screen, he actually left off a major sentence of the Voting Rights Act, section 10301, as amended, quote, in that its members have less opportunity than other members of the electorate to participate in the political process and to elect a representative of their choice. That's an important part of what you're going to be thinking about with that criteria, and I'd ask your attorney to give you more information about that. The other thing I'd like to say related to number 5 and Mr. Schleicher, he's talking about the 2017 redistricting criteria on this slide here, but it doesn't match what's in the state statutes when we talk about communities of interest. So having things like shared natural events or military installations, those aren't in this part of it here. So if you're going to be writing those out specifically, and that's what you're looking for us to give comments on about communities of interest, let us know, because again, this is not what's in the state statute. So you need to make sure you're following that. Regarding number 7 and about information, I'd like to make sure that, again, as Mr. Perez said, digital formats are important. So when you talk about an Esri format, that's a closed-ended tool, and it exports things called shapefiles. Having Esri, it's nice that the county is going to give us access to that, but as a social scientist, my expertise is in census. It's not in GIS software. It actually has for me to buy it for myself and use it on my own computer, it's going to cost me a lot of money. And it's actually a steep learning curve. Actually allowing on their redistricting website for public comment the ability to accept interactive links and maps that aren't just from Esri would be valuable. I think that if there is data that can be exported, it should not just come out as shapefiles. So when we're talking about the clerk and recorder's data that's available at a precinct or a census block level, it should not just come out as shapefiles. A GeoJSON or a KML file or a CSV file would be better. I would like also on when we come to public comments that we could put links to interactive maps that come from free software. That's what happened in 2021. As many of you remember who did participate, many of the commissioners there were drawing maps using a free software, and they would post links to it, and all the other commissioners would look at it. And that URL could be looked at by anybody participating in the meeting without needing to get up a steep learning curve of learning Esri. And so it was even taken care of at the live meeting, saying, hey, let's do an analysis on map XYZ submitted by Mr. So-and-so, and we're all looking at the same interactive map. So it would be great that we're not just submitting PDFs of maps on the site, but actually the staff would take interactive links from free software. Also, I'd like that if we submit something even if we submit a CSV file or a JSON file, that it's accepted, and if the staff can't read it, that they get back to us as opposed to feeling like the file is corrupt, that they actually ask the citizens to resubmit the file. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schleicher.
Commissioners, as mentioned in my presentation, the clerk and recorder's office is going to provide maps for free. In addition to that, we will put every shapefile, Excel, and if we need to put it in pipe delimited, we'll put that out there as well.
Thank you. Are there any other? Thank you. Then I believe we have one online. We want to have them get ready.
Blake, could you bring up the GeoCivics slide? Great. Thank you for the time to speak this evening. I'm Rebecca Theobald, a resident of El Paso County and an associate research professor in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs. I speak today as a citizen of El Paso County. Since 2017, I have researched materials to support educators and community organizations in understanding the electoral redistricting process. While many resources focus on congressional and legislative jurisdictions, the same traditional redistricting principles apply at all scales. GeoCivics resources are free and open source, hosted on the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs website, designed to support public feedback and educational instruction. I invite the members of the El Paso County Redistricting Commission to provide a link to the GeoCivics resource website from the El Paso County Redistricting website. Background materials on geocivics will facilitate the efforts of your constituents who wish to create and submit maps and to obtain details about the redistricting process. These platforms and materials have been developed by nonprofit organizations and educational institutions across the country to be nonpartisan and easy to use, designed to guide individuals in understanding how prioritizing different factors produces different maps, leading to particular composition of representative bodies. I encourage members of the community to learn about the characteristics of the population of El Paso County, who lives where, under what circumstances, by exploring the county demographic data, to discuss the criteria for drawing districts and how to prioritize them when making maps, to describe their own communities so that they can advocate for them, to use paper or online mapping tools to draw 5 districts in El Paso County based on the requirements described on the redistricting website, and to be able to discuss with civility other proposals and come to agreement about how best the people of the county may be represented in this legislative body. Remember that the crisis of apportionment threatened to derail the Constitutional Convention in 1787. Understanding this historical process with all its complexity and the current context with many difficult decisions ahead will enable commissioners to make important decisions about the future of the people in this jurisdiction. Thank you for the opportunity to share information about educational resources available to support this republic.
Thank you. And Blake, I believe, do we have one commenter online?
Yes, I'm here. Hello, I'm Zuri. Am I allowed to speak?
Yes, please state your name for the record and you'll have 3 minutes.
Hi, this is Zuri Horowitz. I just would ask that we be allowed to use free, easy-to-use redistricting software like davesredistricting.org. I'm a person that's online a lot, and it's really important that people are, and that is already overwhelming, and the idea of something that's even harder to use sounds like it will stop a lot of citizens from being able to participate. So if you guys could link to free software that people can use and where they can link to their maps, that will help people a lot. I'd also take a lot of umbrage with Parcell saying that minority communities don't have distinct needs and interests. That makes me highly skeptical of his ability to remain nonpartisan. As we know in the past, there have been huge issues with police brutality and different treatment and discrimination of people of color, and to take that out of the equation would be doing a disservice to citizens. I'd also like to point out that the Cook County measure is fantastic for national races. It, like Commissioner Gonzalez pointed out, it doesn't address local races. And as we can see locally, that is a totally different field, and the kinds of people that win locally are not necessarily the same people that are running, at statewide or even at the national level. So state and local state House and Senate elections and county elections are a good way for us to gauge what's going on. And it sounds like you guys will be looking at that, so I'm happy to hear that. And I'm also would, like to know not just 2 weeks ahead when the meetings are going to be, but also knowing, 2 weeks ahead where they will be located, not just the date, because that will help people plan. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public wishing to speak? Okay, and none others online? No others online? All right, that brings us to item number 9. Commissioner Gonzalez.
Madam Chair, actually, because I actually want to know what was said. So, Mr. Gerald, do you mind stating again what your concern was on the competitiveness thing? Just for the records, I did not catch that, but when he said something, I actually would like him to say it. I did not understand whether the concern was whether competitiveness was supposed to be a higher priority or whether because this one I think was answering Commissioner Williams' question about whether it should be competitiveness for all 5, which would be like an average of 9 plus for all of them, or should it be is it okay to have, say, like 1 or 2 that are near even?
Well, I'll read.
So if you keep
I'll
it
read it
short,
from-
but if, I'll give you a chance to come, because I actually did not understand
I'll just
what
read
you
it from
said.
the statute. And then, first of all, it feels amazing to be invited down by this Republican Board of County Commissioners to speak. Never thought that would happen. So it says here, thereafter, so we're right about that. This is a concern farther down the list. The commission shall, to the extent reasonably possible, maximize the number of politically competitive districts. So it's not about trying to make each one of them politically competitive, as is clearly stated in the statutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, item number 9.
Item number 9 is Redistricting Commission direction to staff.
So at this point, we have seen several presentations, been offered some baseline data, and we have heard from the public on some input, and we've also heard of our plans for the upcoming meetings and recommend. So at this point, do we have any recommendations on moving forward? Commissioner Williams.
Yeah, I guess I have a question for Clerk Schleicher, which is, at the first redistricting meeting in my district, are we going to start looking at maps, or how is that process going to work?
So yes, Commissioner, one of the first things that I'm going to work on is getting all that data out onto the public website that was just mentioned. But the first meeting in your district is putting together some maps. And we're also probably going to have some maps once we get the ESRI product out there from the community as well to discuss.
Okay, and excuse me for not asking the person who was speaking, but free software, do you know which free software is out there?
I am not aware of the free software, but the ESRI product is free.
She's the UCCS Geocivics lady.
So it's my understanding that at geocivics.uccs.edu, there are a variety of resources. Some of them are
Yes.
are maps and tools, but
Thank you. I'm happy to answer any questions. So the ESRI product that I understand you're going to put up there will be free and accessible. ESRI is a proprietary product as well, but they have also made it available to people to use. So that gives the county a consistent look, if you wanted to go in and provide that. However, Dave's redistricting app, District Builder, Districtor have all been created in the last decade to facilitate this process. And exactly as we're hearing that the public wants to be able to use those materials and also the woman online. So, and those are all linked from the GeoCivics website. So people can go there and get that information. The challenge is that there's no county setup for that. And that's why Mr. Perez was asking for the shapefiles, so that if we can include, you are going to have some level of engagement with GIS, but you don't have to have that in order to start to have a conversation about redistricting. You could find a friend who had some GIS knowledge and come together, but there are other conversations that can happen about redistricting without having a lot of GIS knowledge.
Thank you.
And I think Mr. Parcell has a clarification as well. And I also wanted to, this may be what he's about to say, but on the website that we have put out there, I mean, you can submit a hand-drawn, really the public's input into this process can be taken in any format it may come. It gives us the discussion points, the starting points, regardless of the tool or the software that's being used. It still allows us to discuss the principles and explore the options at each meeting. Mr. Parcell.
If I may, I just want to gain some clarification to Commissioner Williams' first question about whether there'd be plans at these district meetings. Unless Mr. Hodges feels differently, I don't know that the clerk and recorder's office can develop their own maps in-house without receiving direction from this commission to do so and under what parameters. And so if there is no direction received to that effect today, then the district meetings could be a listening session, which is certainly within the purview of this commission. Or if you direct staff to create maps under certain criteria, then those maps can be discussed in the commission meetings as well. It depends on whether you want to use that to inform the direction for developing future maps or get feedback on maps that have already been developed.
So in other words, it's open season for us to sit and draw our own maps, it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, certainly the citizens have that opportunity with the information that Mr. Schleicher is providing. But to draw maps on behalf of the commission, staff has to receive direction to do that.
Okay. So unfortunately, one of the criteria I will state in my direction that I don't like is keeping municipalities intact, because I know from several people in the town of Monument, they've loved having 2 commissioners, but that was, no, that, and I can see Mr. Jarrell's upset about that, but now we have to go back and try and put Monument all into one district, it sounds like, and make sure Fountain's all in one district, if I'm correct on that criteria. So.
And I'd say that there's nothing to say that the direction has to be all one size fits all. If I remember correctly, I think the law says that there have to be at least 3 maps open for public comment as part of that process before the final vote. And so you can give direction to draw 3 different maps based off of 3 different criteria, or more maps based off of different criteria with a minimum of 3, I would think.
Okay. If I have a comment on that, and this is open for discussion, I wouldn't mind. We've heard a couple of things. One, start with the existing map. We've heard someone say start with the Senate districts. I wouldn't mind at least having 2 maps to go with, starting based upon our existing commissioner districts and moving precincts around, and the second map based upon the Senate districts, because those are 2 things we've heard. I would rather make sure that I give some direction so that at that first meeting, we have maps to look at, and as opposed to, I can certainly spend time to draw some maps on my own, or draw a map, and we could each draw a map. But I want to make sure that we get right down to the meat of it in our very first meeting.
Commissioner Vanderwerk.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just I want to make sure I understand clearly what the statute says with regard to having maps available. I've heard this 3 maps, I guess, for citizens to evaluate. So can I just make sure I've got clarity on what that means? Because if we have that requirement, then we probably should try to figure out, like, what's the date upon which we try to have 3 maps out for citizens to evaluate. So I just want to know what does the statute actually say about that? And then if so, what would, if that is true, what do we need to do with regard to it? Or when should we have something out? So is there a statutory requirement for that?
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If I could just interject real briefly. There's not a direct statutory requirement for X number of maps being, out and prepared on the website by X date. But the way that the website's supposed to work is that members of the public can submit maps any time as we go forward with the various meetings. The board's direction today that I think the staff is seeking is a direction on how many maps and what the parameters might be for our next meeting so that we can discuss, and those can actually be placed up on the website in advance of the meeting. Is that helpful at all?
I think so. If might do a follow-up, Madam Chair. Yes, thank you. So if we're going to try and figure figure out kind of a couple of options here. I mean, there's actually a lot of criteria, and it's not just the Cook Index. It's all of the other criteria that was on the chart or on the presentation. But I do remember one thing that we thought was pretty important in 2017, and even though there have been some citizen comments to it already, I still think it's an important criteria. And that is trying to minimize the number of precincts that get moved around while still meeting the statutory requirements for movement of precincts to get to balance. And that was an important consideration, and it was the argument, which I thought was a valid argument, was minimizing the number of people that get moved from one district to another, because then some people vote more frequently and other people vote less frequently. So I think it might not be unreasonable, and I'd be interested in my fellow commissioners' perspective on this, is maybe one of these future maps would be something that meets the rebalancing requirement but minimizes precinct moves from one district to another. See if that can be one of our choices amongst a couple of other choices.
Commissioner Williams.
I like that option because essentially we'd be starting with existing commissioner districts and going from there. So that, I think that is a very good option because that's one of the criteria I have liked from the beginning, was minimizing the ability for someone to vote me out of office every 4 years. So, although I'm term limited now, so.
Well, and Commissioner, what that does as well, it takes us to the baseline that we spoke about probably about 45 minutes ago to look at the deviation differences between the 5 districts. Starting with that baseline, and if I understand you correctly, Commissioner Vanderwerth, is start with the baseline, look at the deviation differences, but minimize the number of precincts moved to get to that deviation.
That's the thought in my mind. That's correct. Try to get to a balance. Now, it doesn't mean ignoring any of the other criteria, right? Because if we were to do something that severely violate, and this is going to be hard, right? Because there's a lot of criteria, but something that severely violates another criteria, I don't know how good a choice it would be, but maybe there's still an option, right? Just minimized precincts, then we evaluate everything else and see if that even makes sense, which it might, or maybe it might not.
Sir, if I may ask a clarifying question. When you say minimize the number of precincts, does that mean the number, or do you mean minimizing, based on the context of something that you said earlier, moving between the 2 commissioner cycles, meaning that some voters vote on the presidential year, some voters vote on the gubernatorial year? We can minimize the movements between the cycles or minimize the number of precincts or both. But since we can only get clarification in these settings, I think it's important to drill down on that.
Yes, thank you. Madam Chair, may I? Yes, thank you. So I think I was thinking of them as analogous, so I might need a little bit of a dialogue to really parse that out and get an understanding of it. But the idea in my head is minimizing the number of citizens that get moved from one district to another, so that excuse me, so that we have the fewest number of citizens that go an extra 2 years or vote more frequently. And when you look at when you looked at the numbers on the charts for the differentiation as far as voters, right? I mean, I think the largest one was being 7,000 shy in District 3, and I think precincts are somewhere on the order of 1,500 to 2,000 people or something to that effect. So that's theoretically maybe 3, maybe at most 4. You might want to do 4 because then you can try to accommodate some changes, but that would only kind of accommodate 3. Then you've got to figure out how to do the differences in the other districts as well. So you're trying to get to a minimized number of people getting moved from one district to another. Does that help?
Yeah, Blake, would you mind projecting from this monitor, projecting what's on the monitor?
And I'm only offering this as an idea to be maybe one of maybe a couple of different options for this redistricting commission to be reviewing.
Yeah, and so to the point of whether or not they're analogous, so if anybody's looking at this map here, you have a lighter yellow district towards the top, and then the blue one in the middle. Those vote on the same election cycles, and that's the gubernatorial cycle. The purple, the darker yellow one, and the green one vote in a presidential cycle. So, and this is why this is important, because when staff goes to draw the maps, if it's minimizing the number of precinct moves, but also minimizing the number of people that are going from different tracks, different cycles of election, that determines whether or not the clerk and recorder staff can focusing on District 3, take from District 1, that northern area around Monument, Palmer Lake, or the Air Force Academy, or the blue area in the middle, which would mean that people in those two districts would have just voted for a commissioner and then vote again for a commissioner in 2024, versus to make Commissioner District 3 bump up in numbers, mostly shifting between the purple, the darker yellow, and the green, because those all vote on the same cycle. And again, it's not an either or, it can be both. But we need direction as to which avenue is the preference of this commission to make sure that we are drawing them to meet your desires.
Thank you. I appreciate your point, and let's contemplate that a little bit further. I would be interested in comments on this idea from my fellow commissioners.
I would think that we would want to both minimize the number of precincts moved and at the same time minimize the changing of track and cycles. Commissioner Geithner.
I would just say for simplicity, I mean, so many moving pieces here, but I think that the election cycle piece, if we do a map where we're reducing that change in election cycle, would make it really a lot more clear to understand the impacts to residents and how their voice would be heard in that process, while certainly moving precincts from one commission district to another is impactful. If you're getting to revote on whoever that individual is, you still get to choose your representative, whereas if you're disenfranchised through that election cycle. So I would say I would prioritize that criteria, and maybe we do that map separately, just so that it's very easy and clear. I don't know, but I just think it could get a little messy to try and do both of those. So my preference would be, let's get one minimizing the movements of elections, and then we could even do a separate one that's focused more on just the least amount of movements. But I think I'd rather see them kind of separated out.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I do think a good starting point is, as one map, to have one of them that shows minimal changes. However, philosophically for me, that made a lot of sense in 2017 when we were going through the end of the decade. We just did a census. If we're going to make significant changes, it needs to be done at this redistricting, not 2 years after this or 4 years after this, when the minimization of changes is more, I think, reasonable. If we're going to make significant changes, it needs to be done now versus arguments later, which would, I think, prioritize minimizing changes. So I don't want to exclude having more significant changes if they make sense this cycle. So philosophically, if we're going to make significant changes, well, I won't be around in 2 years. Any future redistricting, it needs to be done in this cycle. I think for guidance, we should utilize the precincts method, as was mentioned. I don't think we've actually said that. I want to maintain the precinct changes. Let's use that method, as was mentioned. And for District 4 and any starting points, I like the idea of, again, I was asking about definitions and what's a community of interest. What is that? We didn't get the very specifics. Somebody did mention monument. It says trying to keep municipalities together. From my perspective, I think we should have 2 representatives for the Plains area. That's my personal opinion. But in terms of like keeping communities of interest in the South east of my district. I think Security Widefield need to stay together. I believe Fountain needs to stay together. And because I believe that we should have two representations for the Eastern Plains, from my perspective, I would like a map that includes Security Widefield, Fountain, and Hanover as any map that is a starting point for District 4, and then try to shrink me a little bit.
Commissioner Williams.
I have another procedural question, and I like, I guess Commissioner Gonzalez, as I did too, would be a map starting basically on school districts, is what you meant. Those are 3 school districts, but procedurally, when individuals who are here tonight submit a map, are they going to be allowed to actually present it to us, or if they want to keep their name anonymous off that map? How are we going to do that?
The website right now does require some basic contact information so we know how to follow up. Because those submissions will be public to both the residents as well as the Redistricting Commission, if there is a map that is submitted that that you would like to consider, then staff can just double check to make sure that it meets the population requirements. We can measure the political competitiveness. We can do all those things based on whatever direction this commission sees fit to give us.
And that direction must be given now ahead of time for how and whether we would like those assessed?
Probably in a future meeting, since there hasn't been anything submitted at this point, but I know that you know this, but for the ease of everybody listening or watching, the only direction that staff can execute is only the direction received in a public meeting, so it's always on the record and transparent. So I would anticipate that it'd be at a future time.
Commissioner Geithner.
Thank you. So it sounds like we have several maps going here. And I want to add, I don't know if Commissioner Gonzalez would be open to on what he was requesting and Commissioner Williams of Monument. But one of the things as I'm looking at this here, I think having one where we're seeing Monument whole is a great map to look at. But it's been mentioned twice that there's some interest in that, it seems like there's been some feedback in the past that Monument residents appreciate having two. So looking at this, I'm looking at I-25 and wondering if we could have a map that utilizes I-25 as that boundary. It seems like a pretty natural one. I actually believe that the town of Monument recently created their own internal districts, and that is the boundary. So, and the voters voted on that. So that seems like a possibility to look at as well. And of course, looking at the baseline of where those are, so that would solve a little bit of our District 3 needs to expand there, and District 1 needs to lose some space. But keeping in mind several of those things and moving different districts, and I let me know if I'm going outside of some directions that are either unclear or not quite right here, because I'm just kind of moving this on the fly. But that makes sense for 3 to me. I wonder about making an adjustment that would keep the Black Forest area a little more whole. I know that's currently split right now between Commissioner Williams and I. So I'm kind of viewing that almost as like a little bit of a turn clockwise, as you will, to accommodate the growth in 3 and maybe the growth in 4. And I guess 5 would have to perhaps come up a bit or move to the east. There's some precincts in there, and there may be, part of my district obviously down there crosses over. I can't see what that is, but I think that's, right around the Powers area where it kind of crosses over. So I would say maybe 5, and again, part of this is going to be looking at how many people were moving in those election cycles, but I think there is some sense in perhaps looking at, as you kind of twist that clockwise there, expanding 5 out a bit east, because my district 2 would have to shrink a bit. So that's not super specific, more but just kind of moving that and seeing if that could get to a place where thinking about population most is what I'm doing here, is looking at where the population is and how that might accommodate the areas like Monument and Black Forest that have those communities of interest. Plus, I will say, during the redistricting, the statewide redistricting, there was a huge effort of uniting the West Side. I know that was a really big theme on that side, so that kind of maybe would accommodate a little bit of that up north as well. So I don't know what I would call that, except for a lot of various different things that look at adjusting population, but also keeping some of those important communities together.
Well, and Commissioner Geithner, you're about 3 steps ahead of me. I was going to propose the I-25 boundary, most of our municipalities and also statewide. So you actually took the words right out of my mouth, brother. So thank you.
And in addition to what Commissioner Geithner just said, I think that area you were talking about where your district kind of comes in on mine right there, that's the area right around Mitchell High School. And I think that I've actually long thought, I'll go to a Peak Vista location that is servicing all the residents of my district, but the actual location is not in my district. And likewise for kind of, I think, the D11 school boundaries right there. So I think that's actually extending that section. I'm not sure if that's all the way to Powers or not, but just in knowing that community, and again, knowing that area quite well, that piece has never made sense to me that it does cross over into that other district boundary, because it's much more municipal, much more District 11. And much more Southeast Colorado Springs, which is, I believe, a community of interest. That being said, the question is the city boundaries are beyond that. So I don't think population-wise you could extend that far, but it's not a bad idea to. I like what Commissioner Geithner said about that area.
Well, and Commissioner Bremer, we're talking about a lot of different things, and I just want to try to make this easy for the citizens that are going to be participating in this process. We're talking about school districts, municipalities, cities, and towns, a number of different things that we're having conversations on, which can get very confusing to an average user. So this is extremely simple. When we sit there and we look at a GIS Esri product that we're going to be putting out there for the citizens, and if you've ever gone to the assessor's website, which gets hit, you've heard me brag about this many, many times, gets hit 49 million times a year, they can actually select a commissioner district and it will outline the district. And then you can actually go in there and do overlays for whatever you want to sit there and take a look at. So for example, I want to sit there and take a look at Commissioner District 3. The overlays I want to know is what school districts within that Commissioner District. So it overlay that map with the precincts. So all of this data is very visual. It is very easy where folks can put all those overlays on top to whatever they want to sit there and take a look at. So I just want to sit there and share that with the public as we're talking municipalities, towns, and cities, is we have all those shape files. I have no problem whatsoever putting all that information out there. In addition, is also basically put it into a pipe delimited, or people just like doing Excel and put the information in regards to where they can do a data sort off of Excel.
I have a question.
Commissioner
So
Williams.
if the public needs to phone a friend, they can come into your office? No?
Nope.
But they can go and I can give out Assessor Flucher's number. Okay. I don't know if he'd like that right now with the increase in property values. And then if I, as a commissioner, need to phone a friend, I need to talk to Ryan. Or Kenny.
Commissioner, you'll know from the previous resolution that the board passed that actually established itself as the Redistricting Commission, that staff developing the maps are actually walled off and not allowed to speak with you you can come to me, and I can certainly get you the answers that you need as we go forward.
Thank you.
All right, and I have a question. I'll ask the vice chair. Thank you. So, Steve, if you could just talk a little bit about kind of some of the unique natures of the nature of the military bases, because as I understand, they have large populations, but then a lot of this is based off of population versus voters, if I understand correctly. So the bases have a lot of people, but then they're not necessarily registered to vote in the state of Colorado. They might still be residents of some other state. So in the arena of maybe shifting a military base, and my apologies to Commissioner Williams, because I know she really likes having the Air Force Academy in her district, but knowing there's a large number decrement for District 3, and knowing that the Air Force Academy is in District 1 at present, that could potentially be this idea of moving a large population over to 3, even though it might not substantively increase the number of people voting in District 3 because they are registered somewhere else. But therein lies potentially something valuable in that with regard to Commissioner Geithner's request to let's just see what it looks like using I-25. Because if we do that, moving the Air Force Academy might really take a big chunk, or maybe even place 3 on a positive side potentially. And that was another kind of comment or question that I'd like to make. I don't know if maybe this commission would be willing to consider the idea of, to some measure or another, overpopulating 3 and 5, anticipating that a large amount of growth will continue in the east. And therefore, I mean, we overpopulate those 2, but we keep them within the statutory requirements so that we can try to maintain a balance over the long term. So could you comment a little bit about the bases and kind of their unique nature? And then also, I'd be interested in my fellow commissioners' perspectives on overpopulating 3 and 5.
So, Commissioner, you're absolutely right. As a former veteran in the United States Marine Corps, I have been registered to vote here in the state of Colorado in my 11 years in the Marines, and I was never stationed here in Colorado. So our military bases are extremely unique, where many of our military members are not residents of the citizens of the state of Colorado. They still register the vehicles in Texas or, wherever they're from, which means they do not vote. However, they do count as population here. But the other thing we also need to consider is part of the statute is we have to be plus or minus 5% of deviation in each one of the commissioner districts when it comes to population. So that's what we're sitting here taking a look at as well, is looking at that deviation overall population number. We got to be within plus or minus 5% per statute.
Okay, and if I could ask my fellow commissioners, maybe your perspective on the idea, kind of possibly going forward, trying to build maps that overpopulate 3 and 5, trying to anticipate future growth. Is that considered reasonable by my fellow commissioners?
My comment would be, I think that would be a good idea based upon where the growth is. I do frequently assure the residents in my commissioner district there's not that much growing room left. It seems that those numbers are showing here that there's more growth occurring out east and down in the southeast. And I would like to keep them under the deviation so that they have more chance to grow into their numbers. And so we don't get the commissioner districts. I'd like to create the longest term map possible to do, but that's just not one of the criteria, but I just think it would give a better chance at, keeping things fair.
Yep. Well, again, going back to my previous office as former county assessor, looking at new construction, continued new construction, we are definitely seeing that, and it will continue to be so, in Commissioner District 2, Commissioner District 4, in Commissioner District 1, but more so in Commissioner Geithner's district and Commissioner Gonzalez's district. We have built all the way up to County Line Road as far as we can. I mean, we are right there on County Line Road. We have built all the way up to Teller County as far as we can. So we're basically right now, the only way we can go is northeast, southeast is where we're seeing all the growth, which is, in Commissioner Geithner and Commissioner Gonzalez's area.
And if I might follow on for the chair's benefit, I posed a question about would we want to possibly consider overpopulating 3 and 5 to anticipate future growth so that it can kind of come back to a balance, later on. We did actually do that in 17. We did it to a lesser extent, and I was a bit surprised at how much growth we got in 2 and 4, particularly growth in 4. So I think trying to figure out a balance there, and maybe this is along the lines, considering the conversation we're having, is maybe overpopulate 3 and 5, keep 1 about at the standard, something to that effect, and then underpopulate 2 and 4, anticipating that they're going to grow through that.
Okay, so Commissioner, you got great handwriting. So to sum everything up, right now we are looking at 5 maps. First one that we spoke about was minimal changes, election cycle, minimal precinct moves. So that's the first map. Yep. So the second one is minimal precinct moves. The third one is District 4, 2 reps in the Plains, as was spoken about by Commissioner Gonzalez, keeping Security, Whitefield, Hanover together, and Fountain together. So that's our third map. The fourth one is going off what we were talking about, Commissioner Geithner and Commissioner Vanderwerth, as you brought up, is the I-25 boundary, monument, and keeping Black Forest whole. That would be our fourth map. The fifth one that we're talking about is move Air Force Academy to District 3, overpopulate District 3 and District 5, and underpopulate the other districts, District 2 and District 4. So what you're tasking me with is to put these 5 maps together for our next meeting, if I'm correct.
Commissioner Gonzalez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I definitely don't want a different map on this, but in terms of considerations, I did hear a comment about residents like having 2 representatives for Monument. Just a quick survey, Monument's population is about 11,000. Fountain's population is 28,000. So I don't think there should be any additional consideration for Monument saying they like having 2 representatives when Fountain has 1, and it's much, much greater.
Commissioner Williams.
I would agree with you there. I actually just really dislike having to share my time at the Tri-Lake State of Commerce with Commissioner Vanderwerf, but we always manage to get along pretty good there.
Commissioner Geithner.
Thank you. Yeah, so I think those 5 are a great start. There's a lot to consider, but I think at least getting those 5 gives us a really good shot at starting to look at those. Monument is the town proper of Monument is not particularly large. Yes, I mean, I think Falcon is as a unincorporated non-town is actually bigger than probably either one of them. But I just want to say thank you, because I think that's a really good start for us to really, you can't really know yet what else we might want to look at without having a good starting place. And I think that gives us a lot of variety to work with. So I feel like that's a pretty good workload before our next meeting. And I feel pretty confident that that's a good place to start.
And if I might. Thank you, Madam Chair. So I like the idea of these 5 ideas as a starting point. Just want to make sure I understand one piece of it. So Commissioner Geithner was recommending I-25 as a split, and then I was talking about the Air Force Academy, but the Air Force Academy might not be enough 0.43. So I was really suggesting that in lending itself for an I-25 split. So I don't know if you had them as separate or if you had them together.
Had them together.
You had them together. Okay, great. Yeah. Then I think those are a great starting point for our next meeting.
Awesome. Well, and commissioners, like I said, it's time to get to work. We're going to be putting a lot of data out to the public website. So, citizens can download that stuff, use the shape files. So we're going to be working on that. And Angie, do you got anything?
Good evening. I need clarification because I had map 5 as moving the Air Force Academy to District 3. Do you want that to be part of map 4, which is the I-25 boundary that we talked about, and keep a monument together? So we just need the 4 maps, or do you want a separate map with the Air
I had
Force
really
Academy?
been considering it as part of the I-25 boundary,
4?
but I don't know I don't know what the population is of the Air Force Academy. If the Air Force Academy alone is 10,000 people, that might be all we need as a choice, not necessarily the final answer, but as a choice to consider. So I don't know what the population is, so it's hard for me to answer one way or another. But I don't know, maybe it's not a bad idea to do both of them. One is just the Air Force Academy and the other one is I-25.
We'll do both then. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would be curious to see what you would get if, and this is the west of I-25 one, adding everything in but Fort Carson. And then you get, even if it splits the town of Monument, you get all, because Forest Lakes is really big. And I know we've got some sort of development coming up there in the top precinct, up by the top of the hill. So there's, it'd just be interesting to see what you come up with.
Absolutely. And Commissioner, you're absolutely right. I knew as soon as we put together the Baptist Road Rural Transportation Authority to work on that, and as soon as that was done and the bridge went over the railroad tracks, I knew that was going to be a highly developed area.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So we've got a couple of options to look at that certainly, I think, address some of the considerations for District 3. But I think I just want to make sure I'm clear on what are we going to be including in those options to address District 5.
Well,
I believe, as was previously suggested, having that eastern boundary of District 5 jut out to Powers, and have Powers be the dividing line. Commissioner Geithner.
Yeah, and on that one, I think, depending, obviously, without knowing exact population numbers, but I kind of gave 2 suggestions there, was moving eastward and even moving northward, since Commissioner Williams' district is both on the same election cycle and needs to lose a bit of population. I'll leave it to staff to look at those numbers and jockey which, how that would work best. But I think either one of those options alleviates some of those concerns.
I think it will require both.
And Madam Chair, so none of those address mine. Again, I just says as a minimum, I'd like to keep, or District 4 should keep Security Whitefield, Fountain, and Hanover. That leaves Southeast Colorado Springs, Stratmore Hill, Stratmore Valley, and the general Fort Carson, which must go to either 5 or 3, because I'm over by 4,000 or 4,500. So just wanted to clarify that. But again, I believe District 4 should keep Fountain, Security Whitefield, Hanover, and then something else on the east, but I don't want to name that specifically. So there's flexibility. Thanks.
And if I might, and I'll just say that I think just considering that unique nature of the Southeast, I think that's a reasonable request and perhaps fairly easy to address. I think keeping them whole, and that kind of speaks to these other requirements about doing what we can at least to keep municipalities whole and whatever else it might be, because there's a lot of common characteristics in a lot of those communities in the Southeast. So that I think is reasonable to do what we can to keep them together.
Yep. Well, and one last thing, commissioners, is it's extremely important as we ask the citizens to engage in this process is when we sit there and we're taking a look at where to get this data, we're going to be putting a lot of data out there. Folks will be Googling, pulling up a lot of stuff. However, per the statute, we have to use the data from the 2020 census. You know, people are going to sit there and look at numbers in regards to 2023, but per statute, we have to use the 2020 census data. And I put the links on my presentation, which Ryan is going to go ahead and post onto the website, but we have to go to the state demographer's office to download that data, to pull that information. So that is extremely critical because folks are going to sit there and go, well, I'm not getting the same numbers as the 2020 census data.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there any further direction or clarification needed that will give us a starting point for the next meeting of the Redistricting Commission, which, Mr. Purcell, can you remind me, that's the first week of June? And we do have a location, and that one will be at, I believe, Lewis Palmer High School in District 1.
Very good memory, Commissioner. June 12th, Lewis Palmer High School at 5:30 will be the next
Excellent.
one. And we will, as we get the other locations nailed down, we'll announce those as well.
And with that, I think we've accomplished an awful lot for starting points at this point. And then I wanted to encourage the public to utilize that website to submit suggestions, play with the data yourself, and I think we have a great starting point for our next discussion. Any other final comments? With that, we are adjourned.